And then the third way that we can determine the MIC is called the Kirby-Bauer disc diffusion test. So we'll just take the bacteria from the patient's culture sample and grow that in our Petri dish. And then we'll place these paper discs with a particular antibiotic on it onto our Petri dish. And we have a little spring-loaded machine here that will place the discs onto the Petri dish for us. And this way we can test multiple antibiotics at the same time against this patient's bacteria. We'll incubate this for 24 hours and then come back and measure the zone of inhibition, the clear area around each disc. And the larger that zone of inhibition is, the lower the MIC is, and the better that antibiotic is going to work. So for example, if we compare this antibiotic here, where there's no zone of inhibition, to this antibiotic here, where there's a very large zone of inhibition, you would choose the antibiotic with the large zone of inhibition. That's going to work much better than the one where there's no antibiotic, or sorry, where there's no bacteria that have been killed around there. So what's happened is that closer around the disc, you've got a higher amount of antibiotic, and then as you move further away, the antibiotic levels get lower. And so you have a much lower MIC out here than you would, like, for example, on this one. This antibiotic would have a higher MIC because you're closer to that disc. So you have a higher concentration of antibiotic that's needed to kill the bacteria. So the larger the zone of inhibition, the lower the MIC, and the better that antibiotic is going to work. So this antibiotic would work better than this one, and definitely much better than this one, which didn't even kill the bacteria at all. So what we can do with this information is we will actually measure this zone of inhibition here. So they just measure that in millimeters. So maybe we measure this one up here, and let's say maybe that measures to be 22 millimeters. So then we go and take a look at our graph here, and for our particular antibiotic that we're looking at, let's say that maybe we're looking at amikacin. And for amikacin, let's say that we know at the doses that we give patients, we know that the level of amikacin will be somewhere between 7 to 28 micrograms per mil in the body. And if we know that on our Kirby-Bauer disc diffusion test, we measured a zone of inhibition against, maybe this was Staph aureus we were looking at from our patient. And we got a zone of inhibition of 22 millimeters. If we go up here and then we come over, we can see that our MIC here for amikacin would be about 1.8 micrograms per mil. And we know that amikacin, when we give that to the patient, we know that we're going to be at least 7 to 28 micrograms per mil at the doses that we normally give. So we're going to be way above the MIC for amikacin. So that means that the amikacin would work very well against Staph aureus, and so it would be reported out as being sensitive. So that would be a good choice for the patient to kill the Staph aureus and their infection. But let's say that maybe we had another antibiotic that we were looking at. Maybe we had some penicillin that we were looking at. And maybe for this one, when we measured that zone of inhibition, let's say here's our antibiotic disc, and maybe our zone of inhibition here, maybe when we measured that, maybe that was only 8 millimeters. Okay. And we would have, they actually have tables for this instead of a graph that you can just quickly look at to tell this, but you would have a different graph for each antibiotic. But let's just say that just to make it easy, let's just say that for penicillin, let's say we end up with the same level of drug in the body, which we probably wouldn't, but let's just say we do. And so if we have 8 millimeters as our zone of inhibition, and we go up here, whoops, and we come over, then our MIC for the penicillin is about 65 micrograms per mil. And we know that when we give penicillin, we're only going to be between 7 to 28 micrograms per mil in the doses that we normally give patients. So we know that there is no way that we're going to get above an MIC of 65 micrograms per mil in our patients. So penicillin would not be a good choice because we're not going to get above that MIC to get rid of the bacteria. So on the lab culture report that you get back, it would have an R by the penicillin for resistant. Okay, and then maybe another antibiotic, maybe it was at 16 millimeters of zone of inhibition, and it would fall here. Maybe its MIC is sitting at, maybe about 12 micrograms per mil. Well, that is in between where, you could be above that, depending on the dose of drug, but because you do have a range between 7 and 28, you could be at the low end. And you may not get above 12 if you're down here around 7. So that one we would list, maybe, I don't know, maybe we're looking at tetracycline or something. And so that antibiotic will be listed as intermediate, meaning that it might work, it might not. It just depends on the level of antibiotic, because it's kind of right in the middle. It's in the middle of that range, and that if you're on the high end of the range, you could be above the MIC, but if you're on the low end of the dose range, you may be below the MIC, and that antibiotic might not work. So that's the KirbyBauer disc diffusion test, and that's how they report out the results that you get back from the lab. They'll put the susceptible, resistant, or intermediate, and then clinicians can use that information to choose which antibiotic they're going to use to treat the patient's infection with.